Hi, I'm Rishi from DPReview, and we're here at PIX 2015, which is a two-day conference, October 6th and 7th in Seattle, and it's all about all things photography. And we have a series of interviews here with some awesome people who have come all the way out here to join us for PIX. And right now we've got Colby Brown. Colby, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And why don't you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm a landscape, travel, and humanitarian photographer. I've been doing this for about 10 years.
Okay.
And now I own a couple different companies that work in the industry that focus on things that range from marketing campaigns to for large tech companies like Toshiba and Wacom and Sony and Microsoft, to photo education as well, where I teach workshops out in the field in places like Iceland, Japan, East Africa, Norway, stuff like that. And then one of my other companies is actually The Giving Lens, which is a humanitarian-focused photography company that works to blend the idea of photo education with support for sustainable development initiatives in developing countries.
Oh, cool.
And so what we do is we partner with local NGOs that are championing a specific cause, such as clean drinking water projects or species preservation or women's rights. And then we take a team of photographers of various different skill sets down to this country, to this location, and essentially work hand in hand with these organizations in order to sometimes it's build a school, sometimes it's to document part of an aspect of what their NGO is doing, sometimes it's just to champion their cause. And then each trip actually acts as a fundraiser, the money going back to the communities that we work in.
Awesome.
And so
That's
it's
great.
a nice thing that's kind of developed over the years, started as a passion project and has really developed into its own brand, and it for the most part has kind of a monopoly in the photo industry because no one else is really doing something like this to really break a lot of the stigmas of the superficial nature of travel to actually finding tangible ways to give back for photographers.
That's really nice. Well, actually, since we're on the topic, tell me a little more. So it's called The Giving Lens.
Yeah.
And you partner with organizations around the world.
Yep.
How does the partnering actually work?
Well, we have like an organic partnership. So like the problem with a lot of humanitarian efforts in general is that you typically have Western entities or individuals come in and try to tell other people in different countries how to do things. That never really works out well.
Yeah.
And so what we do, as I mentioned, is we have an organic approach where we come in and we find an organization that we feel is doing something really incredible, something that is empowering to the local communities they're working in. They're not developing a cycle of dependency where typically in humanitarian world, an organization will come in and they'll say, okay, we're going to give you shoes, okay? And then all of a sudden that idea of them giving shoes the individuals they're trying to help becomes reliant on those individuals for those shoes, especially if that organization isn't, say, building those shoes in the country to provide some sort of monetary support for the people or empowering the locals to make a difference for themselves ultimately. And so we're very specific on who we work with, and once we find one of those types of organizations that are empowering the local communities they're working in, we'll essentially come to them and say, hey, this is who we are, how can we help? Rather than this is what we do.
So as photographers, how can we help?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, sometimes it's more physical labor and sometimes it's like washing elephants in Thailand, with stuff like that. Sometimes it is more photography centric where we're working with like youth education programs and helping them to develop extracurricular activity programs to help keep retention rates for youth to stay out of drugs and out of into schools, out of trouble, things like that. And so it's really across the board. Every trip that we do around the world is very unique and very different because every organization has different needs.
And how are you? Is this when you say we? Are you saying you and your company? Or are you a team of people you work with? Or
yeah, well, I mean, the company itself has a handful of employees and independent contractors. So I run my own company, Colby Brown Photography, that does the marketing campaigns and the standard workshops, a handful of other different things. And so my hands are usually quite busy. But a lot of the time I help set up future trips, and then we have employees that handle all of our day-to-day stuff. We also have independent contractors, other professional photographers that run a lot of these trips for us around the world, where they're people that have worked with myself generally on a lot of other projects, and so they're people I trust, I know that can handle, they know what they're doing. And then essentially that's where we then recruit people for these teams. And essentially it's like any other workshop, you pay a tuition fee. It's just the difference is that the overhead costs for us don't necessarily come back to the company. There's a small piece that does so we can continue to operate, but the vast majority of it goes back to the local community. So we make a donation to all these organizations or whatever organization we work with.
People will sign up for a workshop in this case, but a lot of that money is going to
go back to it. And it's a little bit different because like with my standard workshops, I have one coming up in Norway in February to the Lofoten Islands. You pay your price, you get your spot. That's just the nature of the beast. With this, because of the sensitive nature of what we're doing with the Giving Lens, there's more barriers to entry because it's a little bit more special.
Right.
And so for that, we have an application process with photographers fill an application. It's mostly just kind of common questions where we're trying to figure out how do people handle adverse, challenging situations? A lot of these places we're working in are, very poverty-stricken, and things are very challenging to work in these type of countries. So automobiles break down and other things happen. And so we're wanting to make sure we get the people that are in the right mindset that truly do want to help and make a difference coming in. And then once they've gone through that application process, then we actually go and they have a interview. So we usually do like a Skype interview. Usually it's like 2 or 3 people at a time. And that gives a chance for the participants to see a person who works with TGL, see it kind of face-to-face, ask questions, and let us really explain exactly what the trip's about and what we're doing.
Okay.
And then once they go through those 2 stages and everything's assumed, then they're given the opportunity to put down a deposit and then essentially secure their spot on one of the trips. And because of the unique nature of what we're doing, most of our trips sell out, and usually in just a couple hours. Sometimes it's a couple days, depending on the trip and how often we've run it.
Oh, cool. So, but this is still for photographers.
Still for photographers, absolutely. I mean, I got the idea when I was, traveling around early in my career, just noticing a bunch of these different issues that faced travelers and photographers out there. The idea again of superficial travel, where things are kind of fake and set up. There's not so many of those candid moments anymore. People aren't going off the beaten path to really truly see a country or a situation or a cause or things like that. And then, like I said, mixed in with the humanitarian elements where it was like, okay, where a lot of organizations are doing great stuff, but a lot of them aren't doing it the right way. And so this allowed me to control a lot of those variables and say, hey, these organizations are doing great, and these are ways that photographers can truly make a difference. Let us be the middlemen to essentially combine both of those together and truly try to help some local communities around the world.
So you're still finding, you still call it a workshop, right?
Yeah, it's still technically, a workshop tour, a lot of them are just labels, usually for SEO purposes.
Are you
for
still
people
teaching?
To find out. We still teach, absolutely, and I guess that's a good point to bring up. I mean, all of them, most of our trips are what I like to explain as essentially collaborative learning environments. And so we're going into the situation, for example, in Cambodia. We have a trip coming up at the end of the year. We're going and working with the Anjali House, and they're a youth education program where we've helped set them up for the last couple of years. And essentially we're going in and we're bringing photographers, and our professional photographers that are leading the trip are going to teach both our participants as well as the youth in this program together at the same time. And then the Cambodian students, as well as our participants, go out together into the local villages, go out together in the local markets, and essentially work together in order to work on small projects or to essentially learn and teach each other. And so
in this case, teach photography?
Teach photography, absolutely. And a lot of these programs, especially the youth education programs, most of them are so developed in the sense where they've been running for a number of years, and we've helped kind of set up and support them, some of them more so than others, where the photographers in these youth education programs are phenomenal. And they have galleries set up in their local communities and things like that, and so they have things to offer our participants as well. We don't want to be the naive notion where we're coming and saying we know better.
Right.
It's how can we help, and let's learn together type of thing.
And
so it's like I said, it's been fun. It started out as that idea of what can I do, and now it's kind of transpired into its own thing and kind of grown from there.
Cool. I'd love to join one of your workshops in Iceland. I just got back from Iceland, and it was very inspiring.
Iceland is a fun place to visit for sure. As I mentioned before we started here, I've been, next year I have a couple of trips lined up, and I think total will be my 18th trip. So
it's also very popular now. We woke up for sunrise at Jökulsárlón.
Yep, Jökulsárlón.
And I swear there were 60 photographers at the beach at sunrise.
Absolutely. Depending on the time of year, it gets really busy or really not. And it's interesting because like during the fall or the winter when the standard times where a lot of people come out for sunrise or sunset, those are pretty popular. But when you go out to like the midnight sun, which is during the summer months, June, July, August, when essentially the sun
Just
barely
dips a
dips
little
below,
bit,
yeah, and it's always light, you're typically shooting at like 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, and so even if there are other photography groups out of them, a lot of the time they're not out. And so it's really, it's surprising. I thought it would be reversed, but every time I go visit in the wintertime, it's the same thing.
Oh, in the winter it's actually more crowded?
Because people, well, if you have sunrise at 9 o'clock in the morning.
It's actually much easier to shoot sunrise and sunset and see the aurora if sunrise is at like 10:30 and sunset's at like 3:30. Because I had a lot of trouble trying to do sunrise and sunset and stay up for the aurora.
It's so hard.
Right after.
And more than 2 or 3 days and you're just wiped.
Yeah, we were already sleep deprived because we literally went a day after our wedding.
That's gonna do it for
and
sure.
And also we're stopping by the road every 5 minutes because like the light's always changing in Iceland, right? I think it must be the high winds or something. Fronts keep moving through.
Yep.
And you just have to keep pulling over because a storm will roll through and then the sun will break and you have a rainbow and
everything changes for sure. I mean, that's the beauty of the places like Iceland is that the weather constantly keeps things different, and then there's so much dynamic and dramatic light that it is difficult to travel from A to B because usually A to B means about 18 different stops.
Long, exactly.
So.
Good thing my wife brought her Kindles.
Yeah.
Reading in the car every time I stepped out.
A trooper for sure. I'm not sure my wife would handle that.
Anyway, so tell me more about. We talked a lot about the Giving Lens, and I just want to step back and ask you about you.
Sure.
How did you get into photography?
You know, it's interesting. I caught the travel bug when I was in high school, and then a bit when I was in college. I'd take a year off here or there, and I'd kind of travel around, and that really inspired me to want to travel more. And I got into photography solely because I had the naive notion that photography might be the conduit that would allow me to travel.
Okay.
And so I took one class when I was in middle school, but I was always much more interested in football and girls at the time, so I don't think I even paid attention.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I graduated from university where I was like, I want to keep traveling. How can I do that? And photography seemed like a logical choice. It was right out when the Canon Rebels came out, so powerful, affordable cameras were starting to be a reality. And it gave me the opportunity to say, hey, I've saved up some money. I'm done with university right now. Let me see what I can do. And so I woke up one morning and I was like, let's change it. I want to do something else. And that's when I had the idea that I maybe should get into photography. So I bought a camera and a couple books, taught myself basically the basics of exposure and composition. Took a lot of bad photos for a number of months, kind of learning what I was doing, and then essentially just started buying one-way tickets. And I was single and nomadic at the time, so I didn't really have any ties. And I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to Southeast Asia for a year. And I'd just buy a one-way ticket to Bangkok and then figure out where I would go from there. And along that way, it allowed me to build up a portfolio, as well as the confidence in what I was doing. And I happened to get fortunate with a handful of different jobs and different things that lined up, and it just kind of took off.
So from there, you're all just pretty much self-branding and everything? For
the most part, yeah. I mean, certainly I had help along the way. I mean, I was 2.5 years after I picked up my first digital camera, National Geographic hired me for their student expedition program to lead their trips in South America, specifically in Ecuador and the Galapagos. And so things like that really helped spur me along. And so I was able to build up a lot of my career early on, or a lot of my branding early on, based on the namesake of companies like that I was getting fortunate to get those jobs.
But it must have been somewhat nerve-wracking and to just say, I'm doing this. Like, what would you say to a new photographer who really wants to do this, but is unsure about the financial insecurity of just buying a one-way ticket and just seeing what works?
It's hard because I think a lot of the lessons that I learned that helped me get to where I am today were learned the hard way. That's typically how most of us professionals get to that point. Yeah. That being said, in retrospect, it's always easier to sit there and say, well, I probably should have done this, or probably should have done that.
Sure.
I think for some people in certain situations, I think just jumping in and giving your all can be the beneficial way to go. That being said, I think it's prudent to do it smartly. And I see a lot of photographers that are just like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to make it happen. And they have no safety nets. They have no things that essentially give them some sense of cushioning that if they do fail, and there's nothing wrong with failure. I think that's another problem in Western society where we have this idea that if you fail, you are a failure, where failing is a part of success and it requires that failing in order to truly succeed and learn from. But if you don't have some sense of preparation, some sense of even money that you saved up to help give you that cushion, saying, hey, this might take a little while. Can I do something else? I see situations like that. It's generally better to kind of be a little bit more prepared for things that may go wrong. And in that same vein, it's interesting space in the photo industry these days where I think a lot of things have shifted and changed in the last 5 to 8 years. And essentially, we're in a place where a lot of people are taking really great images, but that's not enough anymore. Like the fact that camera gear is more accessible than ever before, and camera technology is more amazing than ever before. And so people have tools that they couldn't afford before, and so because of that and a handful of other different factors, there's so many more people taking photos out there. And because of that, even just statistically, let alone talking about technology, you're going to have more people that take beautiful photos. That just doesn't cut anymore, because even people are taking beautiful photos and no one's seeing it. Then what's the point? Where's the business model in that? And so I always recommend that photographers, instead of initially having so much focus on photography or even building a portfolio, like it's certainly important to get your foundation correct, is to actually understand and study some business, study business, to go take a business class in your local community college, really understand the marketing and the branding and all the things that really elevate a talented photographer to a photographer that can actually make it. Because I always use the example of 500 PX. So a lot of photographers know 500 PX, especially landscape and travel photographers, as a place to go and see beautiful images. And the analogy that I like to use is that at any given day, I can go and spend an hour looking at a 500 PX at the editor's choice section and look at thousands of the best photographs that are out there around the world by photographers that I will never hear about again. And I'll never hear about again. And that's just the nature of the industry, is that having that immense talent and putting that creative energy into something is part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation.
Absolutely.
You have to transcend beyond that in order to offer something special or something different or something unique that people actually see. And if you don't, then again, people just aren't going to see it. And then how are you going to make a living?
So I mean, all the different things you do, actually, because you're involved in the Giving Lens, you do workshops and everything. All that diversification is kind of part of that, right?
Absolutely.
Part of that branding yourself and offering something
for sure
new and different.
Well, diversification I think is important in any business model, and I think what we have happened in the photo industry over the last 10 years is you saw the old generation of photographers essentially had the rug swept out from underneath them. I mean, we lived in a day where stock photography used to make photographers six figures, and weddings or periodicals, landing on the cover of Time magazine was this pinnacle. Even National Geographic, or having those facets paid the bills. And these days it doesn't, or at least doesn't in the same ways that it used to. And when I saw the writing on the wall and a handful of those different revenue streams start to change and not necessarily dry up, but definitely shift, I said, okay, hey, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. I want to diversify what I do, and I want to control more of the creative process as well as the business process of every different facet. And so that's why I do what I do now. I don't rely solely on workshops. I don't rely solely on the marketing campaigns I do. I don't rely solely on creating ebooks or speaking engagements or any of those things. All of them are part of a larger pie that allow me to be quite financially successful in an industry that isn't nearly as common.
Cool.
So.
Just to recap, what are your major types of photography that you do?
So landscape, travel, and humanitarian, which is very broad labels. Essentially, it means I shoot pretty much everything aside from things that are in a studio, or like
weddings.
Like weddings or even portraits. I mean, again, a lot of the travel stuff is like candid moments. Landscapes are obviously grand landscapes, places like Iceland, like we talked about, and then the humanitarian is more stuff wrapped around the ideas of things like the Giving Lens, or a lot of the time I do personal projects or things such as I was in Thailand working on our project at the end of 2013, and that was right when Typhoon Yolanda hit the Philippines. And because I was so close and I had the connections within the Filipino military, I essentially was able to fly to Cebu, jump on a supply boat, and essentially be in Tacloban 4 days after the typhoon actually hit. I brought all my own supplies. I was able to work with a couple local photographers, and essentially we documented a lot of the stories that were going on without taking up any precious resources, pulling bodies out of the water, all sorts of things. I mean, this is, to be fair, a lot of this is part of what I studied in college, which is actually emergency administration and planning, which is a little bit of a a different take on things where it was emergency management in these type of situations.
Okay.
And so I had the expertise as well as the skill set as a photographer and the connections to go to a place like that and try to make a difference in telling the stories that might not have been told because a lot of journalists weren't even there at the time. They weren't able to be there because they weren't there in that part of the world at that moment. And so things like that really helped me rekindle and reconnect to the human element of a lot of my photography, where a lot of the other stuff that I do is more about the beautiful parts of the world and the beautiful nature and temples and all these crazy things.
Okay.
So.
Cool. You said you lead workshops.
Yep.
Are these mostly landscape workshops?
Most of them are landscape. Some are travel. Outside of the Giving Lens.
Right.
So they're in places like Japan. I have one coming up in January where we focus on the snow monkeys, and it's not necessarily wildlife focused, but that's kind of one of the big draws. And then we do some work in Hikoto and Tokyo and a handful of other different places. And then other places are like Norway for the Northern Lights and the Lofoten Islands, Iceland for ice caves and the auroras, Hawaii, things like that, where they're usually these big photographic draws.
And in all these places, do you kind of locally connect beforehand to make sure you connect with the locals and so you can take everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I would never go to a place, especially for liability reasons, that I've never been before, or I don't have the connections or the logistics, or I don't know where I'm going and what I'm doing, or haven't made those connections with local fixers or even local guides sometimes where they're prudent. Coming back to Iceland, I've been there so many times, to be honest, I know Iceland better than most of the guides that are there, at least the non-photo ones. Whereas places like Japan, I've been a few times, but I haven't been a ton, so we'll hire guides in certain places to make sure that I'm giving my clients the best opportunities to capture unique moments and things like that.
And speaking of your clients, who do you see mostly on these photo workshops? Just out of curiosity.
It's interesting. It's definitely diversified. Because of the nature of how prolific I am with social media, I have a couple million followers through Facebook, Instagram, Google+, Twitter, all those areas. I think my demographics are a little bit different than a lot of other photographers, where I typically get 18 to 75-year-olds. Like, it's across the board.
All the way, from 18 to 75.
All across the board. I on my last Iceland workshop, I had an 18 and a 21-year-old, and then I also had a 68-year-old Australian guy that came with us as well. And that's also an interesting point, is that they're all across the world. So when I do workshops in places like Japan, then it's split between North America, where I have my biggest base, but also a lot of people coming from Australia, even sometimes coming from the Middle East or Europe. And so a lot of it is geographically based, and then some of it is just based on my branding and how I relate or connect to people that I'm essentially marketing these workshops to anyway, and the facets of which I'm doing that allow, where typically these type of workshops that do cost a couple $1,000s each, they're not super cheap, generally lean towards more people with high levels of disposable income, generally older. A lot of workshops are, for some photographers, can be dominated by white males, things like that, where it seems for me, I don't know why, but it definitely seems to buck a lot of that trend, where it seems to be a little bit across the board, which is fun. And at the same time, because I've been doing this for about 10 years now, I have a lot of connections with a lot of other professional photographers, and every once in a while, another professional will be signing up for the workshops, not of course because they need the education, but it's simply because I've taken care of all the logistical challenges for them. So then they'll come out, they don't need me to babysit them, they know what they're doing, I know that they know what they're doing, and they essentially just get to be in the right places at the right time, and they get to beef up their portfolio, or maybe learn something here or there, but mostly they're there just to take some pretty awesome photos.
And it's great to see, because people are taking it up and
for sure.
going on workshops and wanting to learn. It's a really nice thing to see.
Well, you have the industry as a whole. It's interesting looking at the statistics from all these different big companies. I do a lot of work with Sony, as you know, and seeing statistics for even for other camera manufacturers, where who are the bread and butter of the photo industry now these days, and predominantly most manufacturers, most tripod companies, all these companies are still looking for people with that disposable income. But what's changed and shifted is the fact that cameras are more affordable, and so people that are interested in photography are picking up pretty pretty impressive gear and are learning the tricks of the trade and are saving up maybe for their one trip a year. Maybe they're not going to sit there and they will certainly blink an eye at spending $6,000 or $10,000 to go on a trip, but if it's something a little bit more affordable and maybe $3,000 or $4,000, they're going to save up for a year or two because that's going to be their big photographic adventure for that year.
Right.
And I'm seeing a lot more of that where it's not just the people with disposable income, it's the people that are like, okay, this is like a big catalyst trip for me to allow me to expand my photography or travel to some place I've never been or out of the country for the first time. I get a lot of those as well.
Yeah.
And it's pretty awesome to kind of be able to be the platform or the median or the conduit to allow that to happen.
Well, on a typical workshop, what do you spend a lot of your time actually teaching?
It's a good question. It's across the board, and the reason for that I think is because I have a very I don't do a lot of group education, and by that I essentially mean that because the skill sets on my workshops are across the board, from people that have just picked up their camera and wanted to go on a trip to people that have been doing this for a long time, I found it cumbersome to sit there and say, okay, everyone sit down, you've just spent $4,000 to come with me to Iceland, now let me give you this education lesson. And instead go at it again organically, like we talked about the Giving Lens, where it's like, okay, before we people sign up for the workshop, they fill out a questionnaire, and it's like, what do you want to work on? And then myself and my assistants, exactly. And that way we can make sure that everyone's getting what they want out of it. That leads to better customer satisfaction, which leads to better reviews of these workshops, which leads to word of mouth advertising and all sorts of things.
How many people do you usually have on one?
They're usually 6 to 10. So 6 is if I'm teaching myself, 10 if I have an assistant with me. I never would like to go beyond that, and that's again, you lose that personal nature.
Exactly.
And it becomes unmanageable at that stage.
Cool. Can you tell me a little more about your Sony Artisan?
Yep.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about what that means, and what about Sony cameras has really excited you and changed your photography?
Well, the Sony Artisan is an imaging program. Has been around for a number of years in a couple of different facets, and recently, in the last probably 18 months, it's expanded quite drastically. Where it used to be a very, very small group, it's now expanded to include photographers, top shelf photographers from a lot of different facets they typically didn't go after. From weddings to concert photographers to sports photographers and everything in between. And essentially it is a program that is probably similar to the Canon Explorer of Lights and the Nikon Ambassadors, where we get to have first-hand access to have conversations with Sony about future gear. We get to talk about prototypes. We get to do all sorts of interesting things.
Provide feedback to them as well.
Provide feedback, absolutely. And you guys, DPReview, you guys understand like the significance of that stuff. Like helping to whisper in the engineer's ears of like, hey, this is great, but this might be a little bit better. And having that ability to work hand in hand with them really opens up a lot of different doors for a lot of opportunities from the business side of things, as well as just from the cool technological side. I mean, most photographers are kind of tech geeks. We love new gear, we love talking about this stuff, and so it's cool having that kind of inside track and being able to, I don't necessarily want to say dictate, but definitely have a voice. And speak for other photographers out there. I think that's important. I think it's impossible for any organization or any company to sit there and say, we have 10 million customers, let's listen to every single one of them. Exactly. Like it's just, you'd spend forever reading through those recommendations. And so hopefully the idea is that by working with a lot of professional photographers like myself, that companies like Sony can get a better feel for the direction of where they should be going, what they should be doing, features that are important, menu settings, all sorts of different things like that that might be vital for photography moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great program, and I think it's encouraging to see how much feedback they've listened to.
Absolutely.
I've heard it from you and other artisans as well as from our own interaction.
Yeah. Well, it's cool when you see, and again, the same thing you guys do at DPReview, where you mention something in a review, or you have a conversation with the Sony reps or whatever it is, and then a generation or two later, you're like, hey, wait a minute, I remember talking about that.
Or sometimes even faster. So
absolutely.
So Sony's been doing a lot. They've been releasing a lot. They've been kind of pushing the field forward and technologically quite a bit. And I'd love to hear from you what recent advances in Sony cameras have been made that really excite you for your photography.
It's a good question. I mean, for me, the reason I ended up connecting with Sony is because of mirrorless. Like, I got sick of going to remote locations around the world and carrying 50 pounds of gear. Like, it was just getting old. And that's why I originally connected with them. And I think at the time when I moved over, which was right around the time that the A7 and the A7R came out, that was the first time that I felt that a company was taking mirrorless seriously. Like, they had some pretty good APS-C sensor, crop sensor cameras before then, and as well as some other companies. But the full frame really kind of caught my eye and brought me into the fold. That being said, during those early days, there certainly was a handful of trade-offs that weren't exactly what I think a lot of us wanted. We were willing to make a couple sacrifices because of the nature of it's exciting, it's new technology, Sony sensors are awesome, obviously they sell them to Nikon and a handful of other manufacturers. But there definitely were those trade-offs, and I think with the release of the Sony A7R II, to me, is really a culmination of pretty much all the other cameras that Sony has released in their A7 lineup to date. And it's interesting because there's so many facets where I feel that it definitely still excels. It does excel compared to a digital SLR. It's not a perfect camera. There's certainly a lot of hype that everyone thinks it's going to do everything perfectly. It's not meant to replace a 1DX or a D4,
or
as well as a as well as a D800 at the same time. It just doesn't happen. But I think a lot of the stuff what they're doing with autofocus is really awesome. I mean, for me, I always had to have, I had the A7R to use for my landscapes and work from a tripod, but the autofocus wasn't great. Whereas the A7R II with this new autofocus system is phenomenal, and essentially that's allowed me to replace a couple of my other Sony bodies that I typically would carry 3 or 4 with me on a trip or a project, to now essentially I carry 2 A7R IIs.
Yeah, so I mean, I did the entire trip with Canon lenses on the A7R II.
For sure.
Autofocus was pretty much transparent.
Absolutely. And that's a good, that's even another important segue, is that not only is the autofocus really awesome with FE lenses and things like eye autofocus, which we talked about before, which is really revolutionary for anything with people, but the ability to use third-party lenses, and not only use third-party lenses like you could with the other A7 bodies and really kind of sacrifice the speed of autofocus, but to really have it, I wouldn't necessarily say seamless, but it's pretty much almost as close as you can get. And there's a few trade-offs. Obviously, using FE lenses, you got to use both the contrast detection as well as the phase detection autofocus points together. Whereas with third-party lenses, you pick and choose. But with the phase detection, it's still awesome.
No, it's great. It's so accurate. And I honestly, I hope it ushers in an era because where we can just choose the best lens and the best body. Because ultimately, that's what the consumer wants. We want more choice, right? And not just that, but even like opening up the system for apps. And, because the stack is better than, it's more advanced than a DSLR, which is much more hard coded.
For sure.
I think there's a lot of interesting things we could see, and I think the company that will really succeed and win the hearts of consumers and photographers is the company that gives you that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you. I'd love to see APIs opened up for the apps. I'd love to see.
Waiting for someone to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're 100% right. I think we're at a stage in photography where, for the most part, any camera released in the last couple of years is going to take a good photo. Like we're no longer at that stage where it's not really going to work out. What's going to continue to separate companies is the bells and whistles, I think, and the few extra small things like that are big for some photographers and just kind of ancillary for others are going to really start becoming the variable that is the determining factor for the buying choice.
So we were just talking about some of the cool new things that'll be disruptive in the camera space, and one example I always like to mention is the phone. I mean, it's not the world's best camera, certainly, but what really makes this a powerful device is the fact that you pretty much crowdsource creativity by opening up the system to apps. And,
Absolutely.
I think that's another arena where if cameras did that, we would just see really interesting things. Like, different photographers need different things. Like, one thing I'll keep on clamoring about is raw histograms and raw highlight warnings, and that's just an example. We're going to see stuff like that if people can actually program
build for it, for sure. I mean, as soon as you open that up to third parties, I mean, you're going to have a lot of gaps filled that I think might not be the directional focus of Sony as a company or as a brand, but that allows it to fill those needs that I think a lot of us want. And I always tell people, man, to me, it's right now is probably one of the most exciting times in photography. Not only because I still feel like I don't think photography is dead. I actually find that there's more money in photography now than ever before. But specifically when it comes to technology and just how accessible things are getting and continuing to get, and how open the idea that you can use third-party lenses on a Sony body, like stuff like that to me is very transformative. And I think we're really going to continue to shape the direction this industry goes.
I mean, isn't that just going to open? Isn't that just going to warm up more people if a company actually dedicates itself to working with any hardware? I mean, because I like, for example, one thing for my landscape lenses, I like to choose lenses that have nice sunbursts. But that really limits you to the number of actual lenses you can use.
For sure.
And the lens or the camera or the technology should sell itself, right? And interoperability just means I would feel so much more comfortable owning that body, for example, because it is so interoperable. So I think it's to their advantage to actually work on this a little more.
Absolutely. Well, they have the benefit right now of having momentum. And I think that's really interesting in an industry where you have digital SLR sales down up to 26, 28%, on a year-on-year average compared to the months, and you have mirrorless sales up 150%. Like, it's still a smaller market segment than I think people might think there are. Like, it's still not fully there yet. It's not a 50-50 world, but it's getting there, and that momentum is heading that direction.
The momentum is such, I mean, one of the biggest sources of that momentum is I think that they kept doing things that I honestly stopped expecting. At some point I stopped expecting phase detection, continuous AF to even work with third-party glass because no one had done it. I was like, there must be something really just makes this impossible. But then they did it, or people were claiming before the IBIS came into the full-frame cameras that it just wasn't possible to put it into that small of a body and still have it work. And then next thing you know,
it's there.
It's there.
Well, same thing. Yeah, I mean, the same thing I think happens with just the full frame in a small body like that. I mean, I was one of the same people where people were like, mirrorless is going to be the future. I'm like, I'm pretty happy with my digital SLR. I'm good. I don't ever see a full frame body. How are they going to physically put it in a small body? And then 3 months later, they're like, here's the A7R and the A7. And I was like, oh,
well, historically, I think humans have been bad at, we've always underestimated where we'll be when we predict the future. So I think there are a lot of interesting things to come.
Absolutely. Like I said, great time to be a photographer.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Colby. I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
It's
Thank you.
It's great to talk with you. And thanks for joining us. I'm Rishi from DPReview, and thanks for joining us.